Have you ever heard a storm coming before the sky turns black? Not the loud ones, but the silent ones. The ones you don't see until the flood has already begun. The ones that don't come with sirens, just consequences. Right now, that's exactly what China is preparing. A silent move, a strategic shift, a global economic operation that is going to paralyze the West, and most people won't realize it until it's too late. This is not war in the traditional sense. No missiles, no troops, no media headlines screaming, breaking news. No, this is economic warfare, quiet, disciplined, decades in the making. And while Western nations debate in parliament, fight on Twitter, and drown in inflation, China is playing the long game. I know this because I've seen it up close. I've watched how the Chinese government thinks, not in election cycles, but in 50-year strategies. While the West is focused on the next quarter, China is focused on the next quarter century. And what most people in Washington, London, or Brussels don't understand is this: the real power shift won't come through military bases or aircraft carriers. It will come through ports, through pipelines, through payment systems, through invisible strings that make the West economically dependent, whether they admit it or not. Let me give you an example. Right now, China controls or owns stake in more than 100 seaports across over 60 countries. Why? Because logistics is leverage. When you control the flow of goods, you control the flow of survival. You think this is about ideology? No. This is about containers. This is about infrastructure. This is about influence without invasion. And that's only one layer. What about rare earth minerals? Do you know how many electric cars, smartphones, satellites all require rare earths? China controls over 80% of global production and refining. Think about that. While the West talks about going green, they don't realize their green dreams are built on materials that China can shut off at any moment. That's not an opinion. That's leverage. This is what I call the silent strike. No noise, no chaos, just slow, quiet paralysis. Imagine one morning the US wakes up and realizes its most advanced technologies can't function because a single export permit wasn't approved in Beijing. You may call that strategy cold. But in China, it's called smart. Because power in this century isn't about showing force, it's about removing options. And every year, the West has fewer options. You know why? Because while Western nations were outsourcing to save a few cents, China was insourcing knowledge, building supply chains, strengthening domestic consumption, and creating new trade routes that bypass Western dependence. They used globalization to become indispensable. And now, they are quietly reversing the flow. They are building what I call economic escape routes, like the digital yuan, not just a currency, a financial weapon. Most people in the West laugh when I say this. They think crypto is a game, but the digital yuan is not a game. It is state-level infrastructure. It's programmable, it's trackable, it's fast. And it's already being tested in cross-border trade. Once fully operational, China won't need SPABO-IFT, won't need US dollar reserves, won't need permission from any Western bank to move money globally. This is systemic independence, and it is almost complete. So ask yourself, what happens to Western power when the financial system they built is no longer needed? What happens to the dollar when nations can trade with China directly, digitally, instantly? That's not just innovation. That's insulation. It means the next time sanctions are threatened, China can say, so what? And it's not just China saying it, because their silent move isn't just internal, it's international. BRICS is expanding. They are building a new payment system, a new trading bloc, a new currency basket. And they're doing it without fanfare, without loud summits, without press coverage in the Wall Street Journal. It's all quiet, strategic, silent. But the impact, it will be thunderous. Because once countries like Brazil, India, South Africa, and now maybe even Saudi Arabia or the UAE start shifting away from the dollar, the West loses its most powerful weapon control. Control through currency, control through sanctions, control through the illusion that Western systems are eternal. They're not. Everything ends, especially arrogance. And I say this not as a critic of the West. I admire much of what the Western world has achieved, but admiration does not prevent collapse. And right now, the West is collapsing internally while China builds externally. I've spent my life building companies that bridge East and West. I've seen the difference in thinking. In the West, speed, profit, growth. In China, endurance, stability, positioning. And in a silent economic war, endurance always wins. So while the West debates inflation policy, China is buying gold. While the West plays stock market games, China is buying farmland in Africa. While the West cancels each other online, China signs multi-decade energy deals. These are not random actions. These are silent moves. And soon, these moves will lock, like a chessboard reaching checkmate. But instead of a king falling, it will be currencies. It will be alliances. It will be entire economic assumptions vanishing. And the people who will suffer most are not the wealthy. They always escape. It will be the middle class. It will be retirees. It will be those whose pensions depend on dollar-backed illusions. Because when the system changes silently, it catches the unprepared loudly. And that's what's coming. If you've made it this far, you already understand that China doesn't speak loudly. It acts quietly. And in today's world, quiet power is far more dangerous than loud threats. Let me tell you something the West refuses to believe. The biggest mistake a superpower can make is assuming it will always be won. That's where the West is today. Still believing that dominance is permanent. Still believing the world will always trade in dollars. Still believing it can sanction pressure, dictate, and everyone will obey. But obedience doesn't last forever, especially when you offer fear instead of trust. And while the West was distracted with wars, elections, inflation, China was listening, learning, positioning. Because influence in the 21st century isn't about military strength. It's about economic dependency. And China has slowly made itself essential. To the phone in your pocket, to the medicine in your cabinet, to the battery in your car, to the food in your grocery store, to the debt in your government. That's not aggression. That's strategy. Let me show you how this silent trap works. The West proudly tells the world to reduce dependence on China, bring back manufacturing, they say, rebuild supply chains. But when they try, they realize they no longer have the factories, the skills, the engineers, the raw materials, the patience. Because China spent 30 years building that ecosystem. You can't recreate that overnight, especially not in a divided, impatient, over-leveraged society. So even as the West talks about decoupling, they're still dependent. Their electric car plans, powered by Chinese minerals. Their green energy dreams, dependent on Chinese solar panels. Their pharmaceuticals, many come from Chinese factories. Even their AI revolution runs on chips assembled in Asian supply chains. And those chips don't move without China's cooperation. It's like trying to quit sugar while eating cake every day. But the real genius of China's strategy, they're not trying to destroy the West. They're making the West need them. And when someone needs you, truly needs you, you don't have to shout. You don't have to fight. You just wait. Because power is not about dominance. It's about leverage. And leverage is silent. It's the contract you signed 10 years ago. It's the port you didn't notice they bought. It's the deal your country made for cheap infrastructure, low interest loans, fast rail. All those things that looked helpful back then are now part of the trap. And this trap isn't just for America. It's spreading. In Africa, China builds roads, rail, and ports in exchange for long-term rights. In Latin America, it invests in mining and energy, locking in resources. In Europe, it owns stakes in logistics, energy grids, and technology firms. In Southeast Asia, it is the top trading partner and growing every year. Even countries that fear China depend on it. That is the quiet brilliance of what's happening. And the West, despite all its resources, alliances, and media, cannot stop it. You can't stop a country that doesn't need attention, that doesn't care about applause, that just wants to outlast you. And outlasting, not outperforming, is the name of the game now. While the West is burning energy fighting culture wars, China is channeling its energy into long-term advantage. It builds when others break. It lends when others sanction. It studies when others shout. But what truly worries me isn't China's rise. It's the West's decline. Because while China has its own challenges, and trust me, it does, the West is drowning in noise. Noise that distracts from the bigger picture. Debt levels are unsustainable. Social trust is collapsing. Media is no longer informative. It's addictive. Elections have become entertainment. And even education is politicized. These are not small cracks. They are foundational fractures. And when a structure collapses, it's never the last blow that causes it. It's the weight of years of rot that no one wanted to fix. And the saddest part, most Western citizens are good people, smart, hardworking, generous. But their systems are failing them. And that's where China wins. Because when a system fails its own people, it cannot lead the world. Leadership comes from credibility. And the West is losing it. One financial crisis after another. One failed promise after another. One war after another. Meanwhile, China keeps expanding trade zones, signing partnerships, sending out engineers instead of soldiers, promoting yuan-based oil deals instead of starting oil wars. That's a different form of power. Not explosive, but exponential. Now, some will say, but Jack, China has internal problems. Demographics, debt, real estate. Of course it does. Every country has problems. But here's the difference: China plans around its problems. The West politicizes them. And when crisis hits, China centralizes resources and acts. The West argues. That's the pattern I've seen again and again. And in an age of silent economic warfare, slow, steady, unified action beats fast, loud confusion every time. So here we are, on the edge of an economic shift that has already begun. Most people don't see it because they expect change to come with noise. But in reality, the most dangerous changes come quietly. When you wake up one morning and realize your currency doesn't buy what it used to, your retirement isn't safe, your country's supply chain is broken, your influence is gone, and the country you ignored is now the one holding the keys. That is the silent move China is making, and it's almost complete. If you understand where we are right now, then you also understand that the next decade will not be led by noise. It will be led by quiet systems, by silent strategy, and by invisible alignment, the kind that's already unfolding across Asia. Let me take you deeper. What's happening now is not just China rising, it's the world rebalancing. The West used to be the default currency, default narrative, default destination. But defaults only last as long as alternatives don't exist. And today, those alternatives are growing. Asia is building the most complex, deeply integrated economic infrastructure the world has ever seen. And it's not just China. Look at ASEAN. 10 countries, over 600 million people, rising consumption, fast trade integration, young populations, digital native economies. ASEAN isn't just China's backyard anymore. It's becoming its business partner, its digital collaborator, and in some cases, its manufacturing buffer. While Western companies look for China plus one, China is doing the same. ASEAN, Africa, Central Asia, all getting investments, factories, and digital infrastructure from China. It's like watching a spider quietly expand its web, not to trap, but to ensure reach. And once that web connects enough nodes, you don't need to fight. You just wait for things to land inside. Now consider Africa. While the West sends aid, China sends engineers, railroads, ports, telecom towers, dams, universities. Decades of deals that don't show up in Western newspapers. But they matter, because influence isn't what you say, it's what you build. And China is building everywhere. Some call this colonization. No, it's synchronization, because China doesn't want to control by force. It wants to make itself so useful, so embedded, that removing it becomes impossible. That's the silent move. Not to dominate, but to become essential. And in a fragile world, essentials are everything. Energy. China is securing it through long-term oil and gas deals with Russia, Iran, and the Middle East, often in non-dollar terms. Food. China is buying land, food processing companies, fertilizer assets, globally. Technology, China is not just copying anymore, it's innovating. It leads in battery tech, solar power, electric vehicles, facial recognition, mobile payments, all without relying on the West. You see, for years the narrative was China imitates, but that time is over. Now, China iterates faster, then innovates deeper, then integrates globally. And once a nation stops imitating and starts setting the standard, you are no longer the follower, you are the reference. And that's what scares the West. Not China's army, not its navy, but its ability to quietly set global standards without asking permission. It's already happening in Africa, Southeast Asia, parts of Europe, and even Latin America. And here's something most don't realize: even Western companies are quietly aligning with China because they can't afford not to. You think Apple can afford to leave Chinese supply chains overnight? Impossible. They're trying to diversify, yes, but the foundation is still there, built over decades, integrated into every screw, every screen, every shipment. The same goes for Tesla, Qualcomm, and dozens of others. They may talk about moving, but they still rely on China. So while politicians posture, the private sector quietly adapts, because even they know the silent shift is already here. Now let me say something that might surprise you. China doesn't want the West to collapse. A strong but distracted West is better for China than a broken one, because China understands if the West falls too fast, global demand collapses. Markets panic. Chaos begins. And China doesn't like chaos. It likes order, quiet order. So the goal isn't destruction, it's paralysis. Let the West keep fighting itself. Let it waste energy on internal division, while China expands, invests, and influences. It's not about taking over. It's about creating a new center. One that doesn't shout, but holds. Because the future isn't going to be American-led or Chinese-dominated. It will be distributed, multipolar, decentralized, but influenced heavily by those who build when others fight. That's the race we're in, not for land, but for leverage. Not for war, but for influence. Not for headlines, but for handshakes. And right now, China's handshakes are being felt from Jakarta to Nairobi, from Tehran to Sao Paulo. And each of those silent alliances is one more thread pulling the world eastward. The West doesn't see it because it's looking for tanks and treaties. But this is a different kind of war, the economic kind, the infrastructure kind, the psychological kind. It's a war of systems. And China's system is holding. No, it's not perfect. There are risks, debt, demographics, political control. But here's what I've learned: imperfect, but unified beats perfect, but divided. And the West, however brilliant its ideals, is deeply divided over truth. Division over power. Division over purpose. And when you're divided, you can't adapt. And if you can't adapt, you can't win. So what does that mean for the rest of the world? It means the future will be shaped by those who stay calm while others collapse, by those who build resilience while others argue, by those who focus not on controlling others, but controlling themselves. And in that game, China's ahead. That's why I call this the silent move, because by the time the West realizes what's happened, it won't be able to stop it. Not because China took something, but because the West gave it away through arrogance, distraction, and denial. And that is the most silent trap of all. So here we are at the edge of something massive, but invisible. A shift not announced with explosions, but revealed through silence, through trade, through infrastructure, through relationships. And this is where most people will fail to understand what's coming, because they're waiting for a big moment. They think power shifts with an election, or a war, or a viral video. But power, real power, shifts in slow silence, one port deal, one supply chain realignment, one forgotten contract at a time. And China understands this better than anyone. You don't become a global force by demanding obedience. You do it by becoming irreplaceable. And that's the trap most Western governments are walking into right now. They still think they can sanction the world into following. That they can shout about democracy while selling arms and manipulating currencies. But influence no longer works that way. In this new era, influence comes from relevance. And China is making itself relevant everywhere. In finance, in logistics, in raw materials, in digital infrastructure. Not loudly, not arrogantly, but with patience. And patience always beats panic. So let's ask the real question now. Where do we go from here? What happens when the West realizes it cannot outspend, outsanction, or out-manipulate the systems it once built? The answer is simple. They adapt or they decline. There is no third option. But for those of you listening, not as governments, but as individuals, you still have time. Time to prepare. Time to position. Time to rethink what really matters. Because this economic shift is not just geopolitical. It's personal. If you are over 45 or over 60, you have lived through change before. But this one is different. This one moves across borders with no army. It seeps into currencies. It lives inside supply chains. It controls access to energy, food, medicine, and technology. And if you're still measuring security by how much money is in your bank account, you're not ready. Because money that depends on a fragile system is not security. Security is what remains when the system breaks. And systems are breaking, slowly, silently. Now, I want to offer you something more than just warnings. Let me give you 200 words of timeless advice, not just as Jack Ma the businessman, but as someone who has spent decades watching patterns, building resilience, and learning from failure. First, simplify your life. Complicated systems collapse first. That includes financial systems, emotional lives, and supply chains. Second, diversify what you depend on. One income stream? Risky. One investment market? Risky. One nation's currency? Very risky. Third, build community, not just capital. In crisis, people don't survive alone. They survive together. Fourth, don't chase headlines. Follow fundamentals. Invest in skills, trust, and tangible value, not hype. Fifth, stay humble. Because no matter how smart we think we are, the world can still surprise us. And finally, think long-term. Even when the world goes short-term crazy. Because those who plant seeds during the storm will harvest when the sky clears. Now, for those of you who feel overwhelmed, I understand. But let me tell you something I've learned during the darkest moments of my life and career. The people who survive aren't the strongest. They are the most adaptable. They are not the loudest. They are the most prepared. So take a breath. Step back. Look at the larger game board. Because the storm is not the end. It is the invitation. An invitation to think differently, to build new systems, to lead without control, to serve without fear. You may not be able to control what China does, or what the West fails to do, but you can control what you depend on, what you consume, what you prepare for, what you build. And that's where power lies now. Not in banks, not in parliaments, but in the hands of those who are paying attention. So if you've listened this far, it means something inside you is already waking up. Don't ignore that. Use it. Talk to your family. Reassess your finances. Study global trade, not just your local news. Look at where your energy comes from. Understand how your food gets to your plate. Ask where your medicine is produced. Question what kind of world your children will inherit. Because these are no longer philosophical questions. They are economic survival questions. And this next chapter of history will not be written by the smartest. It will be written by the most awake. You don't need to fear China's silent move if you're not caught sleeping. So stay aware, stay adaptable, stay grounded, because this time there will be no warning shot, only silence, then impact. But those who are ready, those who have listened, those who have prepared, they won't be paralyzed. They will rise. Not because they had power, but because they had clarity. And clarity in this world is the greatest advantage of all.